On the way home would like to acknowledge the original stewards of whose lands this podcast is recorded on. In York Region, we recognize we're on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and that this is the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In Vancouver, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, whose presence on these lands continue to this day.
Welcome, welcome, welcome on the way homers. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite from Blue Door, where I work with a great group of people to prevent and end homelessness and support our most vulnerable across York Region, Peel, and Durham. This podcast is in partnership with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. The good folks there are doing incredible work across the nation. They actually stand up and they are the voice for our most vulnerable in the government's ear, pushing them to do more, most recently around a housing benefit. And when budgets come out, as a federal one recently did, and they don't hit the mark, the Alliance rallies everyone together, again, the ear of government, to say you missed the mark and push them to do more. They do much, much more than that advocacy work. They do a lot of training and support. Check them out at caeh.ca. If you want to find out what's happening at Blue Door, and lots is always going on because there's lots of work to do for our most vulnerable, go to bluedoor.ca. Check out the work we're doing with our construction social enterprise. Right now, our program Construct, which really what it does is pretty cool. We have a construction company. It's a training program with a social purpose, but we do construction work. So we're bringing in revenue, not on the backs of government. We're doing quality work by experts. What you're not paying for when you hire Construct are the 6 to 8 people that are training, working with Luna 506, the labor union, and then they are launched into the trades. Here's the cool thing. That's all cool, but this is even cooler. The fact that they start with a living wage that continues to grow. It's meaningful work. They're actually, the trades desperately need people. So we're putting people into the trades so we can build the 3 million homes that Canada wants to build by 2030. And also Ontario wants to build 150,000 homes. This year we did about 80,000, I believe. So we're far behind. We need people in the trades. So it solves that. It pulls people out of poverty. It prevents them from entering into homelessness because they have a decent income. It's a win-win-win. We want to scale this across the province, across the country. We want organizations that would say this would be a great addition to the work that we do for our clients. Contact us at bluedoor.ca. Contact me at michael.b@bluedoor.ca and say, hey, we'd love to have one in our community. How can we make that happen? We'd love to have the conversation. Let's get to today's guest. Often I talk about, when we're talking about preventing and ending homelessness, yes, government plays a big part, and we have to hold them accountable. They have to fund it and work with service providers to make sure there are solutions in their communities to prevent and end homelessness. But community also plays a big part. How does that happen? Quite often, we'll put people into homes and we think, job done. But it's not. If they're not connected to their community, that housing can fall apart and they can end up back in emergency housing, or worse yet, on the streets. So how do we connect the community? How do community members get involved in being part of the solution? Today's guest, Marj Andre, is all about that. Marj is from Richmond Hill. It's a city in York Region, just north of Toronto, and she does exactly that. Where we talk all about that in this conversation. We talk about the fact that service clubs and faith communities, which were so much stronger years ago, and they faded a little bit. Participation isn't as high. People don't have that sense of being connected or giving back to their community or service to their community. Maybe that's because people are so busy. The pandemic didn't help. For whatever reason, people are disconnected. Marj is working hard to bring people together. She's done that through various different groups, pulling people together in person, and most recently through a new podcast called Connecting the Community. So she talks about the new podcast, who she's talking to, why community is so important, how she got involved, how you could get involved, and what part community plays in protecting our most vulnerable and building a better country. All that and more as Marj joins me on the show. Now, Marj, you've had the advantage of being on this podcast once before, so maybe you've had some time to think about this question. And we ask the same question to everyone that comes on because it's a little personal to everyone. And that is, what does home mean to you?
Yes. So you have asked me this question before. I also do listen to your podcast every week. So I really have a lot of experience responding to this question. And I enjoy hearing what other people say. For me, I've lived in the same home for 35 years, but it does not mean the same 2,800 square foot house that I've raised my 5 sons in. It's a feeling, it's a place of where you just feel comfortable. Like when you say, I'm glad I'm coming home, it's a feeling versus this actual structure.
I love that. I love that answer. And you talk about comfort, where and many people will talk about, this is where I can be myself. I'm most comfortable. I walk through it, I shut that door, and I'm at peace. So awesome. Thank you for that. Quite often when we're talking about homelessness or supporting our most vulnerable, people are quick to point to government, who certainly play a part in supporting and ending homelessness and supporting programs to help our most vulnerable. But not often enough do they kind of point that finger back at themselves or say community is a part of supporting our most vulnerable, ending homelessness, and I'm a part of that community. You are a community champion. I know you would never describe yourself that way, but you are. You simply are. We know from your work in Richmond Hill and the region of York, you've been involved and pulling people together as well to get others involved. Can you talk a little bit about your journey? How did this come about? How did it strike you that kind of phrase, if it's going to be, it's up to me?
Yeah, it is part of me, is to get people connected, to get people doing things. I am very aware that you feel better when you're doing something, when you're involved. So I've gone out and looked for ways of doing that. I've had the website and the newsletter on richmondhill.com, and that gets people connected. I want people out at events. Very sympathetic. I want to support people who put on events. It's a lot of work, a lot of stress. So I really want to be part of helping them get people out to their events. I have a networking group called Connecting the Community. I have found that people need to get together. And what our group has done, and it's been around for over 15 years now, hard to believe, but people need to talk to each other. And it's what I call cross-sector. So it isn't just a business community, a religious organization, of sports. I really want all the different parts, all the different sectors of the community to come together. So we're doing that weekly until the pandemic. We went virtual. Life has changed after the pandemic, and people are doing things differently. I don't think we've quite settled into exactly what we're doing, but now I'm doing it just twice a month. And I felt like the need to connect up people is even greater now. And I'm doing podcasts for one thing, which is I really enjoy doing podcasts. And Michael, your podcasts have been an inspiration for me. I like what you are doing, and I really think it's effective. I believe in podcasts. I think it's a great medium for getting the word out. You have a good conversation. It's recorded. It can be shared very readily, and I think that's great. I also do what I call a CTC, ETC, which is connecting the community, explore the community. Very often, people have not gone to things and part of their community. We went to the Hindu temple at Bayview and Elgin Mills, and we had a group of about 25, and who's been there before? No one had. We went to the David Dunlop Observatory. One guy, he said, yeah, I've been meaning to go for the last 50 years. And he finally went. So, that's the sort of thing that you go to these places that you've driven by, they're there, and now you go. And I think that is important for making you feel more a part of the community. So those are some of the things I'm doing. It's now we're out of the pandemic and we're back doing things. It feels so good. I found there's a real need to be able to articulate why we can't just do everything on Zoom. It's important. We need to do it for some things. It's good for the environment. It makes life a lot easier. But we need to get out there and actually talk to others, particularly to break down these silos, these sectors. We need to do it.
Well, and it's amazing stuff that you're doing. I mean, you're engaged in community. You're getting community engaged through various different formats. We're going to talk more about your podcast because I'm fascinated by that. But what drives you? I mean, at some point, it takes a lot of effort. I know you put a lot of time, a lot of hours into saying, hey, I'm going to get this community engaged and being more compassionate. I'm going to get them more engaged in things happening in their community. I'm going to get them more engaged in supporting our most vulnerable. What drives you to do that? Where did that come from?
I think it's who I am. I just feel better when I am connecting and getting people really reaching their potential. I feel like, what am I supposed to do? That's what I'm supposed to do. And I really search for ways of doing it. And I feel very fortunate that I have found a few ways, such as doing the podcast.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like I said, I mean, so many great things that have happened that have supported our most vulnerable, whether it's housing projects, health projects, different food banks or different ways of stepping up, have been on the backs of community members who have taken this on. They're not being paid to do this. They're doing it simply for the good of our most vulnerable in the community as its own. Now, you've started a new podcast, so I want you to tell us all about it. How did it come about? What are your hopes? Who do you hope to have on it? What kind of conversations are you going to have?
Yeah, the podcast is called Connecting the Community Podcast. So that was an easy name to choose. I want a diverse group of people on. I really want people to understand what's happening in the community, to meet, to know of some of the great people that are out there and doing things. So there is a whole range. I've talked to people who are dealing with the homeless. I've talked to business people. It's really a whole range of people who are doing things, because that's what our community is all about. Podcasting is relatively simple. I've got myself a mic and a pair of earphones. I've figured out what software works best for me editing. People like you, I have another friend who also does a podcast, and reached out to her and she walked me through it. So doing it isn't really that difficult. And a sort of amusing story is my father had a radio store, and he used to do this and was breaking edge technology. So I sort of feel like my father in doing what he did. So it's sort of a good feeling there too.
Well, I mean, when you talk about connecting, definitely podcasts are a great way to connect people and for them to listen on different sound bites. You can take it with you. You can listen at your, on your own time when it works for you, when you're trying to connect the community. Who have been some of your guests so far? You talked about someone from the business community. I had the privilege of going on and chatting with you about people experiencing homelessness and the things happening in the community. You're going to have a variety of different people. Can you share any of the stories from your guests so far? Anything surprising? Any twists or turns?
Yeah, Hugh Adams, I was talking to him about the Lions Club. He is, I think he's 80 now. Doesn't seem like 80, but he has such a in-depth knowledge of Richmond Hill from way back in 50 years ago. We talked for half an hour, and I said, we're going to have a part 2 because you have so much to say. The purpose was to talk about all the good work of the Lions Club, but there were so many other things that we talked about as well. So talking with Hugh was certainly another one. I've talked to Rahana Samar from the Coldest Night of the Year, because I was involved with that. So it was just an easy way of promoting it. Talked to some small business people that they're just really good people. Kai and Jerry Wu, who just are passionate about getting kids to learn better. I've talked to the minister of the Seventh-day Adventist, which I really didn't know too much about that denomination. And that was a delightful conversation. I felt, yeah, I've driven by their church. Now I know the people there just a bit better. And it was great to see that. I am reaching out to other faith-based leaders, because I think that's really quite important, that religious faith-based organizations, if they're churches, temples, mosques, whatever, are an important part of our community. We often can think of some of the things that haven't gone right, but they, before social services started, they were the ones who did everything. They picked up the pieces and gave the support system. So I'd like to focus on that for them as well. So yeah, it's doing podcasts is my favorite part of the week. So yeah.
Very, very cool. What has the response been? Have you heard anything from people listening in, and what's the feedback you're getting?
Yeah, I'm getting positive feedback. Like, people, I really enjoyed listening to this. Like, this was great. I never knew this about such and such a person. And it's, I feel like I am getting people to feel better about the community and about the people that they live where we live. And that's really the goal, is that you walk around and I'm glad I live here. We'd all be better off if we had that feeling was more predominant.
Absolutely agree. Now, when we often say that housing isn't about the actual four walls and the roof, that matters, that's protecting you. Quite often where we got it wrong in the past is we would put individuals experiencing homelessness into homes where they did not connect to community, and it would fail. So a strong connection to community actually helps with people maintaining their housing. And I think if we look back, you mentioned the Lions Club. When I think of the Rotary, the Lions Club, faith-based groups too, all which have been losing members over the years. Participation is down in all of those groups, and so the connection to community, people have become a little more insular. So the work that you're doing becomes even more important. Have you kind of felt that as you've seen, if you look back 25 years ago, Rotary clubs were packed, people were going to church, people were involved in their community, and not so much anymore, do you think?
No, they're not. And it's it is sad. I think we're all suffering from it. I really asked the question, looked at it. If you were in a smaller community, like I have a cottage up in Minden, people there do belong to the social services, the Rotary, the Lions Club, Kinsmen, the Legion, much more than they do here. We're almost like we've got so many things to do, so many possibilities. We actually don't choose anything, really. We don't get really involved with any of them. So, which is a shame. I understand it, but we're suffering individually and collectively. Like, those organizations do some great work for the community. Help those if you're falling, you've got any type of issue, if it's financial issue, mental health, physical help. There was a stronger network, a stronger safety net, and we're losing that. And we definitely need it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think service clubs are just that, service to others. And that kind of feel too from the faith-based community. Yes, you're right. Quite often we hear about things that did not go quite right. However, I look at even in our region, York region, with Mosaic Interfaith Out of the Cold, seasonal program that supports people experiencing homelessness, was going on for 20 years, driven by the faith community, started by the faith community who saw the need and said someone should do something, didn't point fingers, took it upon themselves. They volunteered to cook meals, open up their churches, and pretty cool from all backgrounds too. So we had a mosque, we had synagogues and churches. It's great. It really, and it gives people a chance to really get involved and understand and have conversations with people experiencing homelessness and see the person first. As we say, people experiencing homelessness, they're able to see the person first because they're having those conversations. It's incredible. You've also been involved in a charge to create a charter for a compassionate community. Tell me a little bit about that. Where did that come from?
Yeah, that sort of evolved from a few people wanting to. We actually were talking during pandemic and realized we need to do something else. And one of the individuals, Sarah Jamal, she was involved with the Charter for Compassion. And we decided we needed to bring compassion to our own community. Most of us were in Richmond Hill, but not all of us. So one was in Markham, one friend was in Markham, one was in Vaughan. So we called it Compassionate York Region rather than just Compassionate Richmond Hill. But also, in thinking about it, a lot of the organizations, organizations that would be involved, if it was a social services, education, emergency services, they're all regional wide. So it made sense that it was York Region. We have got the City of Richmond Hill assigned to the declaration. They are confirmed. They put forth a motion that they are a compassionate city. I feel really great about that. And working with other municipalities to do it, but really to bring us to think about being compassionate, what it really means. And being compassionate really is what your work is all about. It's not, I like to say, it's not always being nice. Being compassionate isn't being nice. It's looking at suffering and trying to figure out how to fix it. And it's really looking at systemic issues. If the homelessness, dealing with mental health issues, the hunger, different. I am fortunate. I work. I'm in contact through the Charter for Compassion with people from really around the world, and different places have different issues. But on the other hand, we all have the same issues of trying to bring people together. There is a real need. The polarization that happens in so many places in the world is so great, and we have to be good, compassionate listeners. We have to approach things with, let's understand and work with people. So Compassionate York Region, we're getting off the ground slowly. We've been doing a few things. Last couple of weeks ago, April 5th was Golden Rule Day, which is really, it symbolizes a lot of what we're all about. The idea that, do unto others as you'd treat others as you'd like to be treated. That really is the major tenet. And that's what compassion is all about. It's like I do well if you do well. And the idea that, individualism is, to me, it really does cause damage when you go around thinking of me first. You are very unhappy and it doesn't work. And if you go around with the thought of being gratitude and how grateful you are for what you have, we're all better off.
Well, you certainly walk the talk, Marj. And let me tell you, if we had 1.1 million Marj Andres in York Region, it certainly would be a very, very compassionate place. It already is, but even more so. You're doing great work. Let's, if our listeners, and I encourage you to listen to the podcast, if they want to listen, where can they find your podcast?
Yeah, it's on Podbean. You just Google Connecting the Community Podcast. I put it on my website. So it's quite easy to find, just Connecting the Community Podcast. You will find it. So, and if you are in Richmond Hill, sign up for my newsletter for doing that. And I do have the networking group. And if you have the time, it's a Tuesday morning, please come out. I just was communicating with someone who was bringing a Ukrainian refugee who looking for connection with people. And I said, bring her out, have her come meet others. And I'm quite positive about what will happen with that. So yeah, it's just quite easy to find. So you have podcast notes. I'll make sure you have the information for that there as well.
For sure. Now, Marj, so this podcast, international, across Canada, if people are saying, you know what, I love what Marj is doing, how she's connecting her community, and I think we need more of that here in my area. What do you say to them? How do you even get started? Like, how would someone just take that first step? Because it can be overwhelming. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mentioned I talked to a friend who had a podcast, and so she walked me through it of what to do. There are various softwares for doing it. And I looked at some free ones and thought, they're going to be a bit too intimidating. She says, no, Marj, use this one. And it was my level of technology. It worked very well. So my podcasts aren't as polished as yours. I have an intro and an outro and a little bit of music. I can do a bit of editing. That's okay. We have conversations like we're having now. And if there's some ums and ahs, absolutely fine. and then you just, after you've done the podcast, you upload it. I chose Podbean because it was one that the friend recommended. It was easy, and it happens. It really is almost like magic that it is that easy to do. So I really do encourage people. There's lots of podcasts out there. I finally admitted to my sons that I was doing it. I found out one son is actually doing a podcast too. He didn't admit. So I think they're quite prevalent. They're very, it's a fun way of doing things. I think now a shift in our culture now is, before we used to sit down 6 o'clock, we'd watch the news. That isn't happening as much anymore. We listen to podcasts when it's news, even the news. We listen to it when it's convenient for us. If there's my favorite podcast, which, Michael, is not you're not my favorite. It's a weekly podcast.
Okay, that's okay.
The Man's Bridge, and it's I look to see. Okay, he's talking longer today. I will chop up more vegetables for dinner when he has a longer podcast, and he'll say, wherever you're listening from. And I feel like saying, you're in my back pocket. That's where I'm listening from. So it's that convenience of, folding laundry, going for a walk. All that is what a podcast is all about. So it's really, I find they're very enriching.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Marj. Listen, if people are listening and you want to do something in your community, you want to strike up the conversations, like Marj said, that wasn't something you knew anything about, did a little bit of work, research, and it's not that complicated. You can make it happen. I'll tell you this about Marj. So in Richmond Hill and beyond, I think you have a lot of counselors who, when they're running their campaign, who do they go to find out the pulse of the community? Marj, right? I mean, she is known far and wide, and she is not afraid, and you're not afraid to let them know when they've stepped out of line. Yep. And they need to do better. You do it in a great way. It's really, from the heart and bringing the community together. You've made such an impact, Marj, and you're a very humble person. But for listeners who say, can one person make an impact? Yes. This is one person who I'm talking to now that has seen a lot of different things, whether it is Ukrainian refugees who need support, whether it's people experiencing homelessness, bringing the faith communities together, whether it's just bringing people together to share experiences and to get to know their community and create that sense of community. Marj has done that and held people accountable to do that as well at the political level. So Marj, thank you so much for all you do. I think listeners can learn a lot about the power of one person, the power community has in shaping and supporting our most vulnerable, and really the power you have in shaping your own community and making it a place for all. Thank you for that. And thanks for your podcast. Listeners, check it out. And Marj, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Michael. So we'll hope to see you around town soon.
Absolutely.